Joe Rogan is the host of the most popular podcast called The Joe Rogan Experience, and his personal politics are heavily debated amongst his fans. But here's a compilation of Joe Rogan going full, quote, liberal mode. Joe Rogan had on Dan Crenshaw, a Republican House representative from Texas, and Joe Rogan debated Crenshaw on the issue of healthcare, with Joe advocating for Medicare for all, or universal healthcare, the plan advocated by Bernie Sanders. Joe Rogan was able to debunk multiple arguments from Dan Crenshaw.
But for all would be available for everybody. Now, if Medicare for all was available for everybody, what you're saying is it would essentially you would fix prices on everything in terms of medical treatments, and that would be a problem because of what?
Well, so once you fix prices, well, imagine this. Imagine if the government said that your podcast could only take $100 per ad, and that was just the price fix from now on. What incentive would you have to really expand your audience? What incentive would you have to keep going or expand the business? You wouldn't be able to. It's similar under any industry. Once you fix that price, you're going to reduce the supply that goes into it.
Can I stop you on that analogy?
Yeah.
Here's the problem with that. The difference is if there would have to be a reason why they would say that I could only get $100 per ad. The reason why you would say that things shouldn't cost too much for someone who's injured or sick is because we want to take care of each other as a community. And the idea is that healthcare should be something. Look, we provide so many services to people that we are united, right? We're the United States of America. We're supposed to be a gigantic community. And one of the great things that we could do for each other is to make sure that if someone's sick or injured and something's wrong, that we can take care of that. We would like everybody to do their share, and we would like everybody to chip in so that this is possible. But there's a big difference between that and fixing the price on an ad.
And I understand a lot of Democrats would say, well, it's Medicare for all. It's not socialism. And I'm like, yeah, but it has very socialistic tendencies, and it has these qualities that I've described of not taking into account the second, third order effects, of removing human incentive, of forcing somebody's services, and because you're calling it a right, which means that you now have a right to somebody else's services. Like these are things that have been proven not to work, and I think we have to understand that as we try to move towards the mutual goal of getting everybody access to healthcare.
Well, it doesn't work with everything, but it doesn't that work with the fire department? Isn't the fire department in a lot of ways a socialist institution?
No. Again, I still say it is not, because it is not under any obligation to serve everybody that demands its service, right? It's there for a specific emergency service as a public good.
But it's there for fire. If there's a fire, they come in and help you. There's not a financial incentive for them to do so.
Right, but I mean, but on a practical level, though, imagine the scaling that has to occur if you're doing that with medical care, and I think that's the difference, both from an economic point and a practical standpoint.
Right, but we're talking about you're talking about socialism overall, not just involving medicine. You're talking about socialism in general, and I'm saying, isn't the fire department an example of socialism that works?
Well, it's definitely not an example of socialism. I think it's an example of a public good, the way the military is an example of a public good, the way the highways are examples of public goods, the way parks are examples of public goods. Right, but they're
funded by the people. It's funded by people overall, and it doesn't cost people money to use them, and the people have these as a basic part of our society and our civilization.
No, I understand that, and I have no problem with that. I just would not call them socialists.
Well, what would you call the fire department? How does it get funded?
It's a public good.
How does it get funded?
It's a public good. It's funded by the public,
right?
And it's not relying on the tenets of socialism to function. And so now we're kind of having a discussion of definitions, and this is an important discussion to have, because oftentimes even Democrats aren't really talking about socialism.
Well, even Bernie Sanders doesn't call it socialism. He's talking about democratic socialism, and he makes some very clear distinctions between the two of them, which I think you could apply to things like the fire department or the police department.
Joe Rogan had on Dave Rubin of The Rubin Report, a man who was formerly of the Young Turks and supposedly went from being a liberal to a conservative. Dave Rubin would say on Rogan's podcast that building regulations are not necessary, and that the free market would solve all of those issues. But Joe Rogan would not have it. Rogan's stepfather was an architect, and his personal experience with building codes made him understand the necessity of building codes. And Rogan would go on to debate Rubin on the issue of building codes and regulations.
Generally, what problem would you, everything you're building here right now, right? Do you want the government to tell you how to do all these things and all the regulations that you got to have your electric thing this far from this and like all
the regulations like that for construction are important though. You do have to make sure that people don't do stupid shit.
But
make sure you
generally,
don't have a power line that's near a water line. There's a lot of.
But I would put most of that on the builders though. They want to build things that are good. Now I get it.
That's not true. Listen, people
people are going to build
corners all the time. Like you have to have regulations when it comes to construction methods, or people are going to get fucked.
They cut corners when there are regulations anyway.
They do. They would cut a lot more if there weren't regulations.
I'm not
If you
totally.
go to third world countries and look at construction methods, they're fucking dangerous.
Yeah.
That's why schools collapse on kids in foreign countries sometimes. Like.
Well, I'm not telling you that I'm against all regulation, period. That's where I said intellectually I like that argument because you could I think you can make a very sound argument that competition would force people to do better work. Like if you're a plumber, you have a vested interest in doing the best plumbing job you can so that people will rate you on Yelp so that you will get more work. You don't have a vested interest in cutting corners. Now you might, right? You're going to push it as much as you can to save as much time and energy and money as you can. Mm-hmm. But once you go over that edge, you don't want to be known as the guy that you tightened something too much so that you flooded the house, or when you're building a house.
You're thinking logically though. When people fuck things up and short things and do things terrible, they're not thinking logically.
But I don't think it's the government. I don't think it's the government that they're like, the government gave me this regulation, so that's why I'm going to do it right.
Well, if they didn't have any regulations, there'd be no incentive whatsoever to do it right.
No, there would be an incentive.
If they knew there were no inspectors, no one was going to check their stuff and make sure that their stuff was up to code. Listen, man, I was in construction my whole life. My dad was an architect.
Yeah.
I've been in construction since I was a little kid. You fucking need regulations. These guys, a lot of people that are in construction, they'll do whatever the fuck they can to make money, and it's not good for the people that have the house because they might have that house for 5-10 years before that problem manifests itself. The people who are establishing these codes are licensed builders or people that have been involved in construction for a long fucking time, and they know what's safe and what's not safe. That's why those codes exist. It exists to protect the consumers. You can't just protect the consumers through the marketplace because it takes a long time for these problems to become a real issue, and these problems could potentially damage everybody in the neighborhood. It's not just going to affect the person on this one lot. Like if a fire starts, it burns all the houses in the neighborhood, or if a flood happens and it floods everyone downhill, it's a real problem. Like you have to be real careful with construction.
Popular conservative pundit Candace Owens would appear on the Joe Rogan Experience in 2018, and she would exclaim that we shouldn't care about the environment, but Rogan completely demolished her belief. Rogan would explain that Candace Owens has not done proper research into climate change and was completely incorrect.
To the idea that like it was progress, we have to care about the environment, it was progress, and it's like no, like we've been losing, America has been losing, and Donald Trump understood that in a way that I didn't, and I thought,
think we have to care about the environment? Like
no, not even a little bit. Like,
not even a little bit?
No. Okay, let me clarify this. I don't throw trash on the ground. Like I'm not saying like we need to like trash the environment. Like but do I believe in climate change? No.
You don't believe in climate change?
Well, I think the climate always changes, I guess is what I should say. Do I believe that this is like, an issue that is being, that is global warming, which they've changed conveniently. They got rid of the word once scientists started disproving it. Now they only say climate change. No, I think that was just a way to extract dollars from Americans. I don't at all believe. They had no actionable plan. It was great for Trump to get out of that deal. It was terrible.
Okay, but this is an incredibly complicated subject.
Right.
And if you would have to talk to a bunch of different scientists and see how they gather data and see what they understand about CO2 levels and what's the danger of them and what can combat it and what could not. Have you done all this, or do you take this flippant opinion based on the party line?
This wouldn't be the hill I died on, right? But it's not about the party. I just genuinely, I've read a ton about it, but I would not be able to come to you and say like, this is my strong opinion. But here's like the easiest way to say this, right?
Okay.
The fact that there is a disparity in the science community about whether or not it's real is enough to.
It's very little, very little disparity.
But,
most scientists the vast majority, agree that human beings are negatively affecting climate change.
Yeah.
The vast majority.
Yeah, I just don't think so.
So you think that the very few scientists that disagree with the
Yeah.
consensus are the ones that are correct?
Well, I think if something is, it's either subjective or it's objective, and there are objective truths, right? But it's subjective if you're saying that there are some, and I don't think there's very little. There are some that don't get paid to go on TV. There's some that are not Bill Nye, who are not funded scientists, and that has been a whole.
Well, Bill Nye's not a scientist.
I know.
He's not. He's
It broke my heart when I found out.
Science
Mouthpiece.
propagandist.
Yeah, but that's the point.
He's
and,
a science. No, that's not a good word.
I don't think Al Gore is a scientist.
He's not.
Right.
But Bill Nye is like a science influencer or
Right.
a science entertainer.
Yeah, he's like a.
But he doesn't have a
like,
background in actual science. He's not a scientist.
Right.
He doesn't have a PhD. He's got an
I learned about him in
undergraduate-
school. Like, everything I did
Yeah.
in science had to do with Bill Nye.
Well,
the
he
science guy.
promotes science, and
Right.
science is not bad.
Yeah.
But the real problem is with climate change is that, for sure, there has been ups and downs throughout the history of this planet. They're observable. They follow them in. I mean, it was one of the subjects that I had earlier today with Dr. Robert Schoch. In 2014, the vast majority, 87% of scientists, said that human activity is driving global warming, yet only half the American public ascribe to that view. So
Well, what website is
87%, and this is,
Scientific American.
yeah.
this? Yeah, .com though. Like 'cause that means it's making money. I don't trust that. If it was a .org, I would probably take that. But this is just a random website, and
Well,
I don't trust.
Scientific American is not necessarily a random website. It's,
Yeah, I don't believe this like at all. Just so you know.
You don't believe it like at all?
I genuinely don't believe it. I know you do, but I genuinely
Well,
don't believe it.
I
Like,
believe most of the
87%?
time the consensus of scientists that are studying the data.
Right.
And so what they're doing is
But do
studying.
you remember all of the stories that came out about the scientists that said that when they tried to present their evidence to show, like they were basically just getting shut down at every corner? You can pull that up too. Like
do you
scientists
mean?
who look up the opposite, right? Instead of looking for what
But
you're
wait a
searching
minute,
for,
but
looking for what
why-
you're not looking
That's
for.
not what I didn't search for it. That's what I found when I searched it.
Sorry.
Yeah.
yeah, look up-
But,
like,
but
look
this
up-
is my question.
Yeah.
Why are you so sure? This is a
No,
extremely.
because what you just said- because what
but
you
this
just
is an
said-
extremely
yeah.
complicated subject.
And it is. I said I am not so sure that I would die on the hill for it.
Mm-hmm.
My opinion right now, and is just that it was a means, because forget the fact of whether you believe global warming is real. Let's say it's 100% real. Let's say we know for a fact it's real. Is there a way?
Well, let's just be clear.
Yeah.
Global warming, climate change is definitely real. It's happening.
Well,
the question
but it's
is why
always
has it happened?
happened.
Yes, it has always happened.
So what are we? What is the? Is it the
real-
climate change? Yes, the climate changes. It was different weather yesterday than it was today. The climate is forever changing. Like that. That's the problem. Is that people are making it seem like that's something weird.
No,
If it's
no,
not
no. That's
unique.
not. You're misrepresenting the issue. The issue is people think that human beings are exacerbating climate
Right.
change to the point where there's a tipping point. We cross over that tipping
Right.
point. We're going to deal with huge problems.
Let's say we all agree that global warming is real. I don't believe it's real. Okay, so I can't
Mm-hmm. But why?
sit here.
But here's the question.
I can't.
But why have a belief?
What do you mean?
Why have a belief as to whether or not global warming is real or not real?
Because
If
I
you
just-
don't
I
have
just
a
find that
background
when
in
things-
it, you don't
you're
understand the
correct.
science.
You are correct.
But why have a belief in it?
Right. So it's not a belief. It's not a belief in it. I don't believe in it.
But
know
that's
it's
what I'm
not a
saying.
belief.
But you have a belief that it doesn't exist.
Right. I personally think that this was just the fact that it was presented to us by Al Gore, and it's just
It's not presented to us just by Al Gore.
Right.
Al Gore made a film,
Right.
and he's been called like the first green billionaire. 'Cause
Yeah.
He's made a shitload of money off of that.
and he flies in his private plane because he's so worried about the emissions. Okay.
That is hilarious.
Yeah,
there's something hilarious about that.
all
but,
of the people that are
but
telling
he's
us.
a fucking politician.
Right.
You know, there's grossness to all that stuff.
Right. And that's what worries me. So my question is, let's say that it's real.
Okay.
Let's just assume, like that's the best way to
Let's
have
say
the
it's
debate.
real.
Let's say it's 100%
Okay.
real. Do you feel that you have found in your research that there is something that human beings can do that would change this all around?
It's possible. Yes.
Maybe because it got so politicized?
Studies into scientific agreement on human-caused global warming, and look at all the studies. It's between 100% and 91% at the lowest. 91% of one of the studies from 2014.
This is the Union of Concerned Scientists.org.
Yeah. They almost. It's a pretty broad
Right.
consensus.
Who are they polling? Is it the people that are a
Scientists?
part of this
It's a good
.org?
question.
That's what I'm asking. That just numbers can be
10,306 scientists to confirm over 97% of climate scientists agree, and over 97% of the scientific articles find that global warming is real and largely caused by humans. Right. So my question to you is, if you want to step outside of the scientific consensus, which is vast and involves 10,306 scientists, and just say, I don't believe in it, even if you're right, you don't have enough information to say that.
Right. No, but that's why I said this is the whole point. But
you're saying you don't believe it.
I don't. Yeah, I would have to have someone sit down and convince me that it was real. I personally don't believe it. That's okay.
But why?
It's good to start at a place of not believing something.
No, it's not.
You think you should start with believing everything?
No, it's not believe either or. Not believe yes, not believe no.
Yeah.
But don't say you don't believe.
Yeah.
Learn about it.
Yeah.
Learn about it and then have an opinion. But you're stating this opinion without having any real understanding of what climate science is.
But that's exactly what an opinion is. I'm not going, like I said, if
Joe Rogan spoke to Ben Shapiro, a hyper-conservative pundit who has a very simplistic thought process about why poor African Americans commit crimes, and that his solution of having them simply, quote, not do it was far too simplistic. Rogan entirely dismantled Shapiro's worldview right in front of his face.
Middle ground? So if we look at 1776 and we look at the Declaration of Independence and we look at America today in 2020, there clearly is some impact in the echoes of slavery, and then after that, Jim Crow. There's clearly some impact in these deeply impoverished communities that don't seem to advance.
Yes. So to make the argument about institutional racism, there's a couple ways you can read this. When people say systemic racism or institutional racism, I usually ask them to be a little more specific in what they mean, because there are a few ways you can read that. One is history has impact. Of course, that's true, right? That's true for everybody. It's true in your family history. Right? If you have a grandfather who went to prison on a particular charge, that leads to poverty for your parents, which led to more poverty for you. Right? People have histories. Those histories are embedded in their life experiences, and that's true for societies as well. All of that is for sure true. Then there's the question as to whether the institutions today are racist. And that's not quite the same thing, right? Because history has consequences is not the same thing as saying the rules today are racist. Because the rules today are not racist, actually. The rules today are quite not racist. But
historically, it's fairly recent. If you go from the civil rights movement to 2020, we're really not talking about that much time. We're talking
3
about
generations.
50 plus years.
60 years, yeah.
I
mean, it's
50 plus.
Right,
in the world of,
in the vast span of human history, it's not
a very small amount of time.
Right.
So clearly there's some impact of both racism and then Jim Crow laws. So that's where I'm saying there's a middle ground.
Yeah, and it is important for people on my side of the aisle, conservatives, to acknowledge and recognize the importance of history in people's living situations now. And it's important for people on the other side of the aisle to, at the same time, not attribute every single thing to history, because
but
people
isn't there
who are born
always something like that? There's always like extremes on each position, and the truth lies somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, but I don't think that it lies as far in the dead center of that as people, I think, want it to. What I mean by that is the problems that have plagued communities in the United States, not just the black community in the United States, but problems of racism or problems of sexism. The way those get alleviated is people making better choices over time. Right? That is the problem. That's the way that those issues get alleviated. When Jews arrived in the United States in the early 20th century, to talk of my people, when they came, they were impoverished. They didn't speak the language. They were banned from country clubs. There was open discrimination against them. They were banned from Harvard. Right? Harvard Law School had quotas on Jews. The way to fight against that is to make good decisions. And so you fight against the system to make sure that the system has rules that apply equally to everyone.
Right, but you clearly see that there's a big difference between people coming over here willingly and doing so in order to better their lives versus someone whose ancestors were dragged over here to be sold as property, and then dealing with the repercussions of that being your family history. And red line laws and all the other things that were put in place to sort of keep them in very specific areas, which to this day remain crime-ridden, gang-ridden, deeply impoverished communities.
Well, that's true, but the question is how much of that is historic redlining and how much of that is an 18-year-old kid today deciding to pick up a gun and shoot somebody?
But how much of that 18-year-old kid today deciding to pick up a gun and shoot somebody is based on him growing up in this fucked up environment where that's what he models, where everything around him is crime and gangs, and you imitate your atmosphere, which is what all humans do.
Right, but the answer is there's only one way to break that chain.
What way is that?
That way is to not pick up a gun and shoot somebody.
I think
meaning
that's
that
a simplistic way of looking at it if you're on the outside of that community and you're not one of those 18-year-old kids that grows up with the incredible influence of all the people around him, and that's all you see, and that's all you know.
Well, but the problem is the only way that's going to be the thing that your kid doesn't know is for you not to do it. At some point, personal agency has to come in.
It does,
because
but education and teaching them about personal agency and letting them understand that there's a way out of this and that the path that they see being replicated over and over again by these people that wind up dying young, that wind up going to jail, that there are other options. There's a lot of kids that never get that other information. Or if they get it, they get little blips of it, but the vast majority of the information, the vast majority of the influence they get is terrible.
Well, I totally agree with this. And this is why I think the worst thing that you can say to a kid is you're born behind the 8 ball and no matter what you do, you're not going to succeed.
Yes,
right? That's literally the worst thing you can say to a kid. What you should be saying is, look at how your grandfather was born behind the 8 ball and look how hard he had to work in order to get ahead. And look at all the opportunities.
That's true, though. But if your grandfather wasn't ahead, didn't get ahead, if your grandfather was in and out of jail, if your father was in and out of jail, if everyone around you is like that, if there's literally no influence that's positive in your life, the idea of saying to a kid like that, hey, don't pick up a gun and shoot somebody, that's way too simplistic a version of their future, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, the problem is I don't see an alternative solution.
Right,
when you're talking about solutions.
I think an alternative solution is there has to be some sort of large-scale intervention in these communities to do something about what has already been set in motion and the momentum that keeps continuing decade after decade. I don't know what could be done.
Joe Rogan was speaking to his friend Duncan Trussell, and he went on a progressive barrage. He explains that people should have empathy for others because luck played into not having poor life situations, like not having enough money to pay for healthcare and having leukemia. And he would also condemn Trump supporters who supported separating parents from their children at the border in a heartfelt and impassioned rant.
Talking about this immigrant issue, and they either don't have kids or they don't think it could happen to their kids. Their idea is, hey, shouldn't have fucking come over here. You get those kind of people. Broke the law. Shouldn't have fucking come over here if your kid, you didn't want to get your kid separated. If you were in the presence of a woman who came over here from Guatemala and she's poor and she's starving and they're taking her baby away and she's wailing and screaming from a primal place in her DNA that the one thing she loves more than anything is being taken away. A baby.
Yeah.
If that doesn't freak you the fuck out, you're not a part of the team, man. You're missing it. You're missing it. What are we here for? We're here for 100 years of whatever. That's what we're here for. If you want to spend 100 years saying, hey, she shouldn't have fucking broke the law, I don't want you on the team. You're an asshole. Right? And I don't give a fuck if you're right or left. I don't care if you're religious or I don't care if you're an atheist. If that's what you support, you're an asshole. And we don't want you on our team. Okay? But if you agree with certain economic policies that I don't agree with, and we could have a discussion about it, we could figure out why you agree, and we could figure out why people are allowing all of this money to get into politics. Why are we allowing all these special interest groups and lobbyists to interfere with our laws and influence our politicians and create all this shit that we don't want? Well, here's the number one reason. You can't just vote online. You can't just vote. It's not one person, one vote.
Right.
It's the Electoral College, and there's a lot of checks and balances that are in place. That's all wonderful and groovy, but it's not giving the trust to the people.
Right.
The trust to the people that they're informed, that they can make their own decisions, that more people should be able to make these decisions. But they're happening now. That 28-year-old girl who won in New York, 28-year-old
That's it.
Democratic socialist. Whether I agree with her or not, and I don't know if I do or don't. I bet I agree with her on a lot of things. I think education should be free. I think we should figure out a way. If we could pay for bombs, we could pay for schools. I think this idea that everybody should have health care, it's a great idea. Who the fuck wants people to not be healthy? Who wants people to be hurt and not be able to fix it? Are you really saying that struggling people should have to pay exorbitant amounts of money to get fixed when we could maybe chip in and help members of our team? That's stupid. Fill it up. Figure it out yourself. I had to. You got lucky, bitch. You got lucky you don't have leukemia. You didn't break both your legs when you were 18. Your parents are dead.
Right.
You got lucky, piece of shit. These are people on our team.
Right.
Because I'm not talking about people who are lazy, good for nothing, losers, mooching off the system. You're going to have that too. Well, we got to figure out how to educate people so that that happens less and less. This is getting crazy. And I know one of the policies is the immigrants, the children of immigrants being separated from their parents, which I'm 100% with you. It's immoral. It's disgusting. It saddens me that it's even considered an option.
Yeah.
It makes no sense. I don't give a fuck if they broke the law. You don't take parents and kids and separate them. You just fucking don't. It's disgusting. There's other ways around it. If you're saying, well, they shouldn't have broke the law. Maybe they shouldn't have broke the law. You don't get to do something that's 1,000 times worse than crossing a line in the dirt. That fucking imaginary line in the dirt, crossing that is nothing in comparison to your crime of stealing a baby from its mother. That's fucking insane. That's not America in 2018. That's just insane. And we wouldn't be doing that to Canadians, okay? If Canadians came over here with their beautiful, cute, blonde-haired kids, we're not stealing them from their fucking parents. And that's one of the reasons why it's sick. The whole thing's sick. It's chaos. So on one hand, I understand where a lot of people are outraged, and I understand where they're coming from.
Joe Rogan has had his fair share of liberal moments. Which one was your favorite? Make sure to comment down below.